Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Lala. I'm with Ignitia, and we aim to democratize weather and climate intelligence across the global South. We've been working with smallholder farmers since our founding in 2010, and we've noticed that there's some particularities we'll share about what it means to generate digital extension services, be it an improved weather forecast, an early warning system, weather-triggered advisory to help support smallholder farmers who, by and large, are rainfall dependent. I don't have to reiterate that with this crew here, but let me tell you a little bit about how Ignitia has approached this massive challenge, and just make a note, as we head into COP, and you see some renewed interest in resilience. We always have in the front of our mind, smallholder farmers don't need convincing that this is a tool that's needed. It's something that helps them prepare for the rainy season. It's something that helps them prepare and preserve their livelihoods. So let's dive into it. Ignitia, let's see if this works. Yeah, here's a little overview slide. So like I said, we were founded by meteorologists, physicists, folks from Jet Propulsion Lab to some university meteorology universities, and basically recognized, why is it that when we travel and do work closer to the equator, that rainfall accuracy plummets? And so this is one of the challenges that the team took in 2010. To date, through our telecommunication company partnerships, we've reached 3 million customers. We do approach this as a social enterprise for sustainability. We recognize fairly early on that when we work on project cycles, things don't continue. We've worked with many of the major brands. We could talk about that offline. Whether or not they cover digital extension in their services to farmers remains to be seen. So we're still looking at innovative ways of bundling this type of service. But to date, I think we shared some 60 decibel studies. We've had at least 4. We've had some published papers of our recent work in Benin showing that it is a top ag tech solution, best in class for net promoter score and attributable impact. And we do this by fixing 2 ends. One is fixing the forecast quality because it remains poor in tropical and subtropical zones. And the second is understanding our end users. And in this case, it's smallholder farmers and climate vulnerable populations everywhere from Kenya to Burkina Faso. And we developed those tools. We're kind of a anti-app. We just want to reach farmers wherever they are. If they're on WhatsApp, we go to WhatsApp. If they're using radio, we partner with Farm Radio. If they're using whatever they're using to get their information and talk to their friends and families and networks about, we bring the content there. And so we have several AI-driven weather models. We started introducing AI back in 2018. It was a deep learning exercise, machine learning, trying to replicate some of the work we had done in modeling weather phenomenon in Ghana. And then we've expanded to capture climate risk indices. And then obviously we're known for our forecast and weather triggered advisory. So I don't have to tell this crew, but extreme weather, humanity's fastest growing threat. It's kind of what we feel from climate change. A lot of economic losses. UN estimates anywhere 3 to 4 billion people lack access to early warning systems. These are the things we benefit from in US and Europe on extreme weather. And what we've seen is legacy weather models miss rainfall prediction. And when you're a farmer, you miss rainfall prediction either in the subseasonal scales or even within season. Give a 7-day rainfall forecast, there's still some major issues with these legacy weather models. And so this map here also illustrates a problem with global north, global south. The way we've built these legacy weather models is with high density amount of observation data. And so when you look on the map and you look at places like sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America, you notice that there's a lot less stations, a lot less observations. So it's one of the challenges going forward that AI companies will need to resolve for. And so we usually do this through partnership at Ignitia. We partner with Planet, we partner with Vaisala, we partner with NASA with ECMWF. The latest stat I saw is we collect 200 billion public and private data points every single day on weather phenomenon. So we just want to partner with the people who are collecting those, and then we can make a better forecast. We don't have to be the ones launching satellites or 3D printing weather stations. We can partner with those people. So we have developed this, what we call physics-informed AI model, because you need to resolve for this challenge of not having observation data in places like sub-Saharan Africa. And we've delivered, we package these forecasts in unique ways that I'll get to in a second for widespread accessibility, so omni-channel approach. What we do is we look at confidence forecasts because we want the end user to understand, should they do something or not do something? So when you go to, let's say Nairobi or Jakarta, and you're in the rainy season and you open up your apps on your Android or iPhone, you're going to see it's raining every single day. And that's not how the rain behaves because of these convective storms. There'll be a downpour at 7 a.m. for an hour, and then it'll be bright and sunny 2 hours later. And then maybe on Wednesday, there'll be another rain event. It's because these global models have a wet season bias that we've kind of highlighted here. So if we are to increase the stickiness and efficacy of advisory to farmers based on weather phenomenon, we need to fix that. And so we look at confidence forecasting. When we say it's going to rain, it's going to rain. So don't tell me 50% chance of rain today, flipping a coin. Tell me it's 80% chance of rain. So that's what we optimize for. And this has been pretty successful in us developing different tools for different sectors. So today, the same forecast that powers Latin America's largest private port operator, Port of Açu, through Ignitia and through large agribusinesses in Brazil, that's the same forecast underlying technology that a smallholder farmer in Ghana or Nairobi or Indonesia can access. And part of it is we want to drive decisions with an improved forecast, so we need to think about forecasting differently. So I wanted to break it into the buckets of kind of timing, because when we talk about a forecast, it's kind of like, what are the parameters, what are the forecasts, and what are the time horizons? So hopefully this illustrates what we do. So we build these products to empower people understand the risk and mitigate the risk. So we do these climate risk scores. So that's using our improved forecast, which has lower bias and predicts extremes better. Let's look at 30 years historical reforecast information and identify hot spots of climate risk. This is really important for crop insurance. It's really important for positioning of resources and aid. It's really important for agricultural investors to understand where there's going to be pervasive challenges of dry spells and issues that we see in the historical data sets that have been improved with AI. Then you have the immediate early warnings. These are things 0 to 3 hours. You got to tell me what's going to happen. Is it a flash flood? Is it a severe rainstorm? Is it a thunderstorm? If I'm drying cashews, do I need to pack it up? Do I need to get off the field if I actually have access to tractors? Or are there things where, for let's say the logistics of it all, you want to make sure that people are moving around and planning any kind of interruptions of moving fertilizer or commodities from point A to point B. So that's a really good use of these real-time early warning systems. We were selected by the UN's Early Warnings for All as a top 4 innovator. And so this is an opportunity for us to work with governments, data as a service, to help fill the gaps in what they currently provide. But this is also a basis for smallholder farmers because it's something that builds trust and confidence that this is a forecast they can trust, because they immediately will see, okay, 3-hour rain event, boom, I get hit with a rain event. AI advisor chatbot. I'm also highly skeptical, even of our own slides here. Chatbot is not the right solution for every farmer segment. We've actually found SMS is the best value for money since we've released that since 2015. Happy to go into more details about that, but there's several reasons why a keyword design, a well thought out design service over SMS may be more advantageous. We've worked at call centers. We've seen farmers stay on those lines for 15 minutes at a time. So there's a lot of issues, but fundamentally for us, we're agnostic. It's about what is the sustainable model going forward outside of a project cycle that makes this appealing. And then looking at, and so this is things like provide a seasonal forecast to help them understand rainy season onset and duration of the season. Is it a 90-day, 110-day cycle crop they can select? And there's a lot of really, really good evidence out of University of Chicago, out of some of the studies we've been able to partner with 60 decibels and others on and get out there, that by equipping farmers with rainy season onset for planting date, optimizing input application and harvest timing are key practices for weather-triggered advisory to boost yields. In Benin, we saw relative to a control group 20% increase in maize, 13% in cassava. These are relative to control groups, just with a simple improved forecast that touches on those three things. You can also look at some of the other studies done by Swift that looks at this. Again, the evidence is clear and directionally positive. Farmers that have this information do better. And then looking at seasonal outlooks, this is very good. You know, we've worked with World Food Program, International Rescue Committee, helping for flood forecasting, maybe food insecurity issues, obviously with the pullback of US aid, but reinstatement of FEWS. This is great news for everybody in the industry, but there's still gaps in what we can do for these types of early warnings and trying to see within the season where we see stress. Have a bunch of different kind of thoughts here. I did want to flag human-centered design's been critical for us. You know, when you say just get an improved forecast, when you look at some of the things being tried in the field, they'll just give somebody a numeric, like a number-based forecast. Oh, it's going to rain 30%, or it's going to rain 80%. When you interview farmers, and we do this a lot, we have, you know, we've been in Ghana, like I said, since 2010, have offices in Brazil, in Nigeria, in Kenya. When we sit with farmers and we do these trials, you'll realize very quickly that digital literacy matters, numeracy matters, literacy matters. And so an interpretation of a critical parameter, like let's say chance of rain 80%, farmers in Kenya would interpret that as it's going to rain very, very heavy because 80 is a large number, not separating chance of rain from precipitation amount. And so there's really a lot of ways we need to think with the farmers, iterate different ways very quickly. When do they go to the farm? When do they access information? Are they doing it the night before, or are they doing it early in the morning, 4 or 5 a.m.? This is when we kind of design these systems to make sure they have the content they need when they need it. And then how are they actually understanding what we intend them to understand based on the forecast? And so our forecast looks very, very different depending on the market. In parts of Burkina Faso, it'll look like today, high chance of rain, morning time, tomorrow dry. In Nigeria, it's a combination of numeric number hour by hour and some narrative text underneath. There's local language. There's also, but if you go to Brazil, for example, everybody's WhatsApp obsessed. So there's like over 80% of farmers use WhatsApp and networks within WhatsApp to converse with other farmers about weather phenomenon. So we create very shareable PDFs, and we found that to be very, very successful. I never thought I would be at a tech company and talking about Adobe PDFs, but here I am, because that's the way those older, slightly more conservative farmers want to access this kind of content. I will highlight this, right? I actually came to Ignitia through TechnoServe. I was working on a project in northern Nigeria for post-harvest loss reductions in the tomato value chain. And this was under a YieldWise project with Rockefeller. Ignitia was one of the technologies that worked. And this is maybe like 8 years ago, reduced post-harvest losses because it helped wet season tomato growers understand things like staking and getting the tomatoes off the ground and reducing kind of losses from different diseases. And I was frankly really disappointed that projects like that never continued because you had attributable impact. You had a very low dollar value. So if you were investing $200 per farmer, an investment like Ignitia is like $2. And so one of the studies we did with 60 decibels was showing up to 50% of the yield impacts is attributable to a digital service. So there's a good balance between traditional training with smallholders and then digital services. It's not all one or the other, but there's a good mix that can happen. And so, I do want to highlight particularly for this crew, because I was really impressed with the conversation at Climate Week. You guys can grapple with tough problems. There's overlapping efforts. There's individuals that are trying to create their own, do-it-all platform. There's folks that are specializing in weather forecasts, or folks that are specializing in, access to market initiatives for farmers. But there's donors coming in, there's governments coming in. Everyone has a very different perspective on this. And our hope is that through some of these larger initiatives like Aim for Scale, there can be a little bit more of coordination among the partners, because this is a technology that is ready, off the shelf, evidence-based, proven to improve yields, reduce post-harvest losses, build resilience to climate change, increase savings, you name it. These types of services, I'm sure PxD will talk about this as well. There's a ton of evidence that this works. There's not a ton of coordination on making sure that this is widely accessible. And unfortunately, with USA gone, there's very few leaders in the market that can convene different partners and build a better market system for this type of service to reach smallholder farmers when there is no marketplace for this, particularly in the most vulnerable segments. So what do I mean by that? Traceability. If you want a location-specific advisory or a location-specific weather forecast, you have to have the locations. So it's a huge problem in many areas, not having a valid phone number, not having valid location. And I just want to share some of the impact stats. I think in some of the pre-reading, hopefully that made it out to all of you. Do go through it. We learn a lot from this. Mercy Corps Ventures, who's an investor of ours, have really helped us understand impact measurement management approach. So how do we scale things that are really working for farmers at these different time horizons, like the nowcast, the short-term forecasts, short-term advisory, and then the longer-term subseasonal forecasts. And so we've seen some really good evidence, not just of building yields, but also building climate resilience as folks understand what kind of season they're going to have. We've been pleasantly surprised with some of these tools. If we make it, a super low cost, high volume play to broaden accessibility, again, something like a couple cents a day, so that there's like a yearly subscription, $1, $2, something like that at scale. You actually crowd in a lot of first-time digital users, and so that's been a really good digital tool users. So that's a really cool thing we strive for. We're remote. We've really kind of have a diverse skill set of folks, either, like I said, meteorologists or folks who've kind of worked with smallholder farmers and in social protection programs. And so we're really eager to talk to this group, happy to take questions, happy to figure out ways that we can partner together or share lessons learned as we do something and you're doing something else. Let's see what the best way forward is. So thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. If you could stop sharing your screen, please, and then we'll switch over. Thank you. And Madhav, please go ahead. If you could, Madhav and Anjani from PxD will be presenting on their specific application and lessons learned from the monsoon. Madhav, if you could just, and Anjani, when you speak, if you could just briefly say who you are, appreciate it.
Yes. Can people see my screen, and can you hear me as well?
We can. Looks good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great. So hi everyone. First of all, thanks a lot, Jonathan, for suggesting to organize this event and for recommending this topic. Thanks to all those attending, giving us an opportunity to share some of our latest work on small farmer climate resilience and climate adaptation. My name is Madhav Vaidyanathan. I'm a senior manager at PxD. And together with my colleague Anjanay Singh, who's a research manager at the organization, we're really excited and happy to be here and represent PxD and share our experience in scaling AI-driven weather forecasts to farmers in India. So broadly, we'll cover 4 topics today. We'll begin by sharing some background, and kind of like what Andrew did, setting a foundation, setting the stage, and making a case for farmer-facing weather information services. We'll then dive into one of the use cases around monsoon onset forecasts in India. Hopefully showcase the evolution of monsoon onset forecast work in India from 2024 and leading up to the development and delivery of monsoon onset AI-driven monsoon onset forecasts in 2025. And then we'd like to dive a little bit deeper into how PxD was involved in that program and showcase and talk a little bit about our approach and experience to design testing and delivery testing of these monsoon onset forecast messages, hopefully, demonstrating the value of last mile efforts in making these services effective and farmer-centered. We'll finally end on a note on how we intend to take this momentum going forward. Right. So with background, I mean, Andrew spoke quite a bit to this, but just to sort of revisit topic quickly and say that small farmers depend heavily on weather, and with climate change and climate variability, weather is becoming more erratic, and it's harder for farmers to make good agricultural decisions around those circumstances without better information. And so that leads us to an obvious solution area where they benefit greatly from more accurate and timely weather forecasts to improve their ag decision making. And there's a number of rigorous experimental studies out there that show how such weather information can add value to farmers on their downstream outcomes. And similarly, there are other experimental and rigorous studies. Case in point, an experimental study on PxD's digital ag advisory services in Odisha state in India, which highlight that such information can be disseminated to farmers very cost effectively, very inexpensively, through systems that are reasonably simple to integrate into public channels, which then make it a way to sustainably deliver this at scale. So we have this challenge, and then we have this sort of solution area, but the unfortunate situation currently is that there aren't many of these accurate weather forecasts going around. And I think this is where PxD can really play a big role. At its core, we care deeply about identifying and scaling evidence-based solutions to farmers, and really we see ourselves as a bridging organization between the innovation and the farmer, and aim to do so sustainably by working closely with government partners. So in this spirit, we see the present moment as a great opportunity to take advantage of the revolution in weather forecasting driven by AI, and to generate the momentum and partnerships needed to deliver weather forecasts to millions of farmers worldwide. We've already begun that work through the delivery of monsoon onset messages to nearly 40 million farmers in India, collaborating with a number of different partners, starting with the Human Center for Weather Forecast Initiative, which includes a set of researchers from the University of Chicago and the University of Berkeley to generate those forecasts, and then working closely with Development Innovation Lab in India, as well as the Central Ministry of Agriculture in India and the Department of Agriculture in Odisha state to effectively translate and transfer these messages to the farmer in a way that they can meaningfully engage with it and use them. Right, so with this background in mind, we'll dive into this case for monsoon onset forecasts. Let me begin with an overview of what these forecasts are about and what sort of problem they're trying to address. So the monsoon is the heavy rainy season in the Indian subcontinent. There are 2 monsoon seasons, and the one we're really concerned with here is the one that period of rainfall moving from the southwest of the country to the northeast. And it occurs between June and September each year, roughly. It is also associated with the main agricultural season in the region called the Kharif season. And so kind of again, what Andrew was mentioning, this affects, so rain-fed farmers who depend on the rain, they depend critically on the timing of the arrival of these monsoon rains. So in simple terms, if they plant too early before the rains arrive, then there won't be enough moisture in the soil, and the seeds may not germinate. The germination will fail. But conversely, if they plant too late, right before the rains begin or when the rains have begun, the growth might not be optimal, therefore the yields might not be optimal, or worse off, the seeds could wash away, wiping out their entire initial investment. And more generally, beyond like the timing of the planting, the timing of the arrival of the monsoon affects other key decisions that need to be made before the arrivals of the rain. So accurate and timely monsoon onset information would really help farmers make better decisions. And I suppose we can go a step further to say that the longer the range of these forecasts, the further out they are from the onset date, the additional time provides an opportunity for farmers to make significant non-marginal decisions on key farm outputs, like how much land to prepare, what kind of crop to choose, what kind of seeds to select, over and above the timing of the planting, that could make significant impact on their seasonal outcomes. And this also includes, depending on how long or short the monsoon season might be, depending on when the monsoon arrives, this could also affect decisions like how much to substitute away from agriculture activities to off-farm activities. And finally, another point to make on monsoon onsets is to clarify what the definition of monsoon onset really means. We aren't referring to like the first rain of the monsoon season. Ultimately, farmers, what they're really concerned with is ensuring that there's a sufficient amount of topsoil moisture for their crops to thrive. And so they want to know about the arrival of the continuous rains that will lead to this sufficient topsoil moisture. So for these forecasts to be relevant to the farmer, they need to align with that understanding. And to this end, the forecasts that we're going to be talking about follow a related definition, which is also borrowed from a couple of academics, Moron and Robertson. And it's basically the first predicted wet day succeeded by sufficient rainfall in the 5 following days from that onset day. Also, and on top of that, the other condition is also to make sure that there's no 10-day dry spell in the following 30-day time window. So there are a number of conditions to be met before we can say a particular day is the arrival of the monsoon. And these conditions together lend itself for predicting a period of continuous rain and hence reliable topsoil moisture. And as you can see, it's a bit of a mouthful and fairly technical. So Anjaney, when he gets to his bit, will talk a little bit about the role that design testing and sort of what Andrew was talking about, farmer-centered design testing, what role that can play in effectively presenting such complex information to farmers in ways that they can meaningfully engage with it. Right. So in 2024, researchers at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research developed accurate long-range 4 to 6 week out monsoon onset forecasts. And a team in India and a team of economists at UChicago went on to rigorously evaluate the impact of these forecasts on farmer outcomes through a randomized controlled trial in one of the states in Telangana in India. I won't go into the design of the study too much, but I've linked the paper here for your use. But what's interesting is to discuss the results, which were very promising. First, farmers understood and trusted the messages. They shifted away from their prior expectations, closer to the predictions of the forecast themselves. And the farmers who then aligned themselves more with the forecast predictions also adapted their decisions accordingly in 2 different ways. Those who initially expected an early arrival of the monsoon season, but then received a later and less favorable prediction, which is to arrive later, they decreased their agricultural investments. They increased their non-agricultural investments and shifted towards more a less water-intensive crops like rice, moving away from cash crops like cotton, which are more water-intensive. And conversely, those who initially expected a late arrival of monsoon adjusted their expectations and who adjusted their expectations to an earlier, more favorable onset based on the forecast prediction, they increased ag investments and they decreased non-agricultural investments and shifted towards the more water-intensive and more lucrative cash crops like cotton. Furthermore, these input investments corresponded to changes in agricultural outputs, which is another consistency with the theory of change. Overall, farmers in the treatment groups that were receiving these messages were also shown to have improved in welfare outcomes, observed both through food consumption and an overall well-being index that they constructed for the study. So following these promising results, a team of climate scientists, climate engineers, and economists, one of whom Dr. Amit Jina, who was actually an author of that previous study, they came together as part of this human-centered weather forecast initiative to experiment with AI weather forecasting models for agriculturally relevant use cases. And they took off-the-shelf open source AI models to produce and benchmark monsoon onset forecasts. And remarkably, what they found was that these models, which are just off the shelf, were performing better by reducing errors against the predictions of long-range historical averages of monsoon onset, as well as against predictions from globally recognized numerical weather prediction models like the ECMWF's IFS. And they were better for forecast versions that were both 2 weeks out and 4 weeks out, so fairly long range. Even more remarkably is that these AI models were able to perform really well despite being significantly cheaper, significantly faster, and really simple to operationalize, which you can just do on a laptop, as opposed to needing a supercomputer or GPUs, which I understand you typically need for a numerical weather prediction model. So on the back of these results, they took it to the government of India and sought their approval, secured their buy-in, and then we entered into a partnership, HCF, DIL, the government partners, and PxD to scale these forecasts in the country. Ultimately, the forecasts that went out were developed as localized monsoon onset forecasts for 200 kilometer by 200 kilometer resolution grid boxes, skillful enough to disseminate across 13 states in India. And they didn't use any one open source model. They used a blend of 2 open source models. One was Google's Neural GCM, and the other one was ECMWF's Artificial Intelligence Forecasting Service. Right, so these are the AI forecasts that were eventually disseminated earlier this year to 39 million farmers, and they were delivered through 2 channels, through 2 public channels. 38 million of these farmers received the messages through the Central Ag Ministry's SMS channel, and an additional 1 million through Odisha State Department of Agriculture's voice-based channel. These messages were sent out in 5 locally relevant languages. Promotional messages were sent out through WhatsApp. The dissemination costs were ultra cost effective, less than a cent per farmer for the entire dissemination cycle as it pertains to SMS. And the costs, both at the central level as well as with Odisha State, were borne by government partners. Farmers didn't have to pay for this service. Right, so we are in the process of evaluating this year's forecast and its influence on farmer outcomes. But what is really worth highlighting is its accuracy of the predictions. This year, the IMD, which is the Indian Meteorological Department, declared onset over Kerala on the 24th of May. And Kerala is where the monsoon season begins in India. It's the southernmost part of India in this map. And it was an early onset. Typically, the monsoon sets over Kerala around the 1st of, on or around the 1st of June. This time it happened about a week earlier. And the rule of thumb dictates that there's usually a very rapid northward progression from when it sets on in Kerala. And if we look at the actual onset pattern here, we find that it is consistent with this rapid progression. So for the southern half of the country, the part that's shaded in gray, you'd see that if you bring your attention to the box that says northern limit of the southwest monsoon as on 28th May 2025, and you track the green line that points to that then leads to the blue isochrone, the northernmost blue isochrone. It shows that the monsoon set in the central part of India on 28th May, which is just 4 days after it set in the southern part of India on 24th May. So in 4 days, we've covered literally half of the country. And so you might expect that such rapid progression would then continue further north. But there was a pause. There was a pause in the progression of the monsoon in the northern direction beyond that central half. And to take, for example, this grid box that we've highlighted in pink, which is in a state called Madhya Pradesh in India. Out there, you might have expected that the monsoon to arrive fairly early, given this rapid progression, maybe at latest in early June. But the official declaration of monsoon onset was on June 18, nearly about a 20-day pause in the progression. And what's really interesting here is that the AI model predicted this pause, even at long range. So if you look at the messages at the bottom of the screen, these were the messages sent out to farmers in those regions. On May 28th, a message was sent out saying the onset was most likely to happen after June 17th. Following that, in June 4th, the onset was most likely to occur between June 10th and 24th, and similar for June 11th, all accurate, fairly accurate predictions, quite far out. So we felt like this really highlights the value that these kinds of weather forecasts can bring to farmers. If a farmer in that region had this information, they could have greatly benefited, because looking at the rapid progression in the southern parts of the country, they may have planted a bit early. But seeing this pause, or if they had access to this information and trusted it, they may have planted a bit later, and they would have avoided the risk of germination failure. Right. So that's all about the monsoon onset program. Just take a step back now to understand how this all came together. Here we have a sort of logical framework or a theory of change outlining how such weather information services can be expected to affect farmers on their downstream outcomes. And I'd really like to highlight 2 points here. One is, first of all, to ensure these outcomes, that we move the needle on these downstream outcomes of farmers. And again, speaking in the same spirit of what Andrew was saying, we contend that it's not just the relevance and the accuracy of what scientific information is being generated. That's very important, but equally, how do those messages reach the farmer? Are they effectively transformed into comprehensible and actionable messages? Are they disseminated through delivery channels in a timely and accessible way? These are important questions for us. And as this is the part of the pipeline where PxD's expertise and experience really comes to the fore. And a second point that I wanted to highlight here is that when thinking through this process, we tend to skip the middle and focus on like downstream outcomes, yields, harvest, economic returns, well-being. But it's really important to note, and when thinking through the design of a workflow, that a number of intermediate outcomes can and should be observed before we could reasonably expect, moving the needle on a downstream outcome. So, when you're sending out messages, do the farmers access them? Do they engage with them? Are they reading it in the context of a voice message? Are they getting it and are they listening to it? Even if they do read or listen to it, do they recall the information and do they comprehend it? And finally, even if they do comprehend it, do they trust it and are they, open to having that update their beliefs? So these are all important indicators that organizations working this way should consider measuring, because you can't reasonably expect to move the needle on downstream outcomes without moving the needle on these outcomes. And measuring these things will help you understand what's going well and what's going wrong at an earlier stage. Right. So how can we achieve this effective translation and dissemination flow or mechanism? At PxD, and again, speaking similarly to how Andrew was, we believe that in order to effectively translate and disseminate scientific information to farmers, we need to iteratively test both the message design and the message delivery whilst placing the farmers at the heart of this testing exercise. And we use a combination of approaches and methodologies to conduct this sort of testing exercise whilst engaging our target farmers in the process. And we found this across many contexts and projects to be meaningful and effective. Why? For the following reasons. First, scientific ag information, scientific climate information is technical, and small farmers may not be well equipped or have the right literacy levels to comprehend them in its raw form. The messages need to convey the right kind of information, but in a simple and comprehensible way, and testing really helps to identify that right framing to be taken to scale. Secondly, not all small farmers are the same. They're quite varied. They have they come from different contexts. They grow different crops. They live in different agroclimatic zones. They have different needs, tastes, preferences, and testing can help refine messages to meet those contextual needs. And finally, our experience has shown that small tweaks in design and delivery lead to notable changes in these intermediary outcomes that I was mentioning a few minutes ago. And this can be better identified through a sort of iterative process. Right. So, that's all on iterative design and this sort of broad mapping of how these weather information services, how one way to think about these weather information services. What we'd like to do now is to share our experience with design testing in the context of the monsoon onset forecast program, and hopefully demonstrate its value to you that way. And for this, I'll hand over to Angela.
Thanks, Madhav. Right. So to set the foundation for iterative testing, we focused on understanding both the forecast details as well as the farmer context. To understand the forecast details, we worked closely with the HCF team to understand the technical details of the forecast, that it was probabilistic in nature. It focused on agriculturally relevant monsoon onset, and it was available 15 to 30 days in advance of monsoon onset. In parallel, we conducted formative research with farmers through in-person surveys to understand how they perceive monsoon onset, what are the local expressions that they might use for this phenomenon, and lastly, what are the agricultural decisions that get influenced by monsoon onset. Together, these two exercises inform the key questions for iterative testing, which were how to convey location relevance to farmers, how to convey the temporal information, the probabilistic information, and also the agriculturally relevant monsoon onset clearly and meaningfully to farmers.
Anjani, if you just for definitions, could you tell us in your words what temporal and probabilistic mean, just for a general audience?
Right. So by temporal, we mean what is the date range by which the monsoon onset might arrive? The probabilistic would be the associated probability involved with the forecast. So whether there is a 70% chance of monsoon onset arrival before a particular date. Right. So why does iterative testing matter? Let me try to illustrate this through a simple comparison. I would like you to take a moment to read through the sample forecast message that's present on the screen. So the message that you see here has been created without iterative testing, relies on literature, expert judgment, or assumptions which we had made without any farmer feedback. So what are the issues that can arise with such a message framing? The first is, it's okay. The first is the use of the word region for the location. When farmers interpreted this, they understood a much broader area than their own village. This was less intuitive for farmers rather than using a Gregorian calendar. It was difficult to link with specific farming timelines. The term expectation, um, farmers said, expressed more of a desire rather than a likelihood that they were getting from the forecast. The definition we use for monsoon onset here, again, it's too technical and verbose. Farmers are likely to lose interest or misunderstand what we're trying to communicate here. And lastly, just using 70%. Strikingly, this is something which Andrew also mentioned. Farmers, even in India, often mistook it for the rainfall amount rather than the probability of monsoon onset arriving. And this is what you can end up with iterative testing. We arrive at a more farmer-centric forecast message framing. The forecast message you see here is the outcome of multiple rounds of iterative testing with over 100 farmers across 2 states in India. This process included in-person surveys, focus group discussions, and co-design sessions with farmers to try and reach a stage where the forecasts are farmer-centric and actionable enough to inform agricultural decision makings. Hence, it is clear to see that with and without iterative testing, we see a fundamental difference in how farmers could have comprehended the same forecast information and how they would have applied the same for any associated agricultural decisions. What I'd like to note here is that just for the presentation purposes, we've shown the English translations, but these messages were actually disseminated to farmers in their 5 official regional languages. Right. So what you see here and what I've highlighted are the 6 key elements that went into building the farmer-centric forecast message. The first is the location. So the forecast was generated for a 200 by 200 kilometer grid box, and it's not aligned with any administrative or political boundaries. So we needed a term that signaled localized relevance to farmers. The temporal information, which indicated agriculturally relevant monsoon onset, was likely to occur, and we had to use this in a consistent and clear way. The likelihood term, since the forecast is probabilistic in nature, the phrasing needed to convey likelihood without implying certainty to the farmer. The term monsoon onset, it is extremely technical, so we had to try and ensure that the farmers understood the context without it being extremely verbose. The qualitative descriptor, now the descriptor helped the farmers interpret the forecast in an easy and practical manner. And lastly, the numeric component. This was designed to communicate the numeric information in a simple and intuitive manner. So together, these 6 elements made up the building blocks of the farmer-centric forecast design and any associated forecast message templates that we might have used. Now, just to deep dive into how we came about some of these terms and why some of these terms were used, I would like to take you through a few examples as to how we went about the process. Right. So as Madhav has indicated earlier, the monsoon onset definition is agriculturally relevant, but it is extremely technical for anyone to understand. So for us, it was important that we prevented misinterpretation of these forecasts that could lead to misguided farming decisions. For this, how we approached the challenge was to conduct iterative testing with farmers across two states through FGDs, in-person surveys, and co-design sessions. What we did was that we presented farmers with different ways of describing monsoon onset and tested their comprehension and interpretations of the same, and then tried to see what best aligned with the technical definition. The term continuous rainy season emerged as the most relatable and accurate. It matched farmers' natural understanding of steady, useful rainfall for agriculture, while also aligning closely with the technical definition that the forecast producers were using. Right. Now the qualitative descriptor. The forecast uses numeric information, but there are varying literacy and numeracy levels among farmers, and it was challenging for them to interpret percentages accurately. For this, we conducted in-person surveys where we tested variations of how to communicate probabilistic information. And specifically, what we tested was how to do this with and without qualitative descriptors such as low, moderate, or high. Now, what we strikingly saw was that adding a qualitative descriptor improved comprehension by up to 25% as compared to the non-descriptor version, as shown in individual observation sessions. Additionally, it was also necessary for us to identify a consistent and interpretable scale linking percentage ranges to the qualitative descriptors. We adopted the IPCC standard probability scale for qualitative interpretation of uncertainty. And lastly, the probability itself. These issues have been highlighted earlier, but how we approached this was to try and test different formats to present this information, be it through percentages, ratios, or a combination of both. Now, percentages are somewhat familiar to farmers. They often encounter them in their everyday contexts. However, when used in the weather forecast context, uh, many farmers actually misinterpreted it with the percentage of rainfall amount rather than when the monsoon onset was going to arrive. Ratios, on the other hand, were difficult for farmers um, uh, to comprehend and were much less intuitive, especially when using bases such as 10, 20, or 25. What we saw was that a combination of percentages and ratios using a base of 100 actually indicated an improved comprehension amongst farmers. So as is with any program, we've encountered several challenges and important lessons along the way. For this session, I'd like to focus on the challenges and lessons that we've learned through the iterative design phase and the message framing phase. The first is that of low literacy and numeracy levels. Many farmers found it difficult to interpret forecast probabilities in technical terms. This reinforces how important it is to keep doing iterative testing across seasons so that we can strive for message framings that are easy to understand for all farmers eventually. The next is historical weather priors. So even when we went on the field, farmers often interpreted forecasts based on their past experiences with rainfall or monsoon onset. So this means that it will take time to build trust in forecasts, and repeated exposure over several seasons will help farmers rely more on forecasts rather than relying on their historical priors. The third is that of digital dissemination. So we relied on SMS and IVR as channels to disseminate the message. But there were some constraints with the same. So with the SMS, there is a constraint of the number of characters the SMS can be. Or with IVR, the challenge is that of the length of the message so that we avoid farmer fatigue. So we had to find a way to communicate the relevant forecast details while also staying within those constraints. The fourth is time and resources. This year in particular, we had rapid operational timelines, and it was difficult for us to carry out multiple design iterations. Despite this, we saw that the iterative design testing that we did gave us substantial insights into farmer comprehension. So with additional time and resources and broader testing across diverse agroclimatic regions, we could have actually undertaken an activity to refine the message formats even further. And lastly is collaboration at scale. Implementing a large-scale national program required coordination across multiple partners, from forecast generation through message design, approval, and eventual dissemination. There were a web of partners, and there were obvious dependencies and bottlenecks that came along the way. And this gives us an impetus to actually include buffer times to ensure seamless and timely execution of the program, especially given the fact that this is a very time-sensitive forecast dissemination process to do with monsoon onset. I would now like to hand it back to Madhav so that he can just quickly take us through the way forward.
Thanks, Jonathan. And sorry, I think we've gone a bit more than the 25 minutes that you gave us.
Okay.
But this is the last slide, so we'll be done quickly. So yeah, just a note on the way forward. We're really excited to help advance AI-based weather forecasting for small farmers and just weather forecasting for small farmers more generally as well. We are keen to continue delivering on the existing monsoon onset use case, or more generally rainy season onset forecasts, to more farmers in India. We've done it to 40 million farmers, and we'd like to expand to how many ever databases are available. We'd like to do that, and there are plans in place to do that even for the next year through central and state partnerships, as well as and we're also keen to go to other geographies where there's a similar need, starting with Ethiopia, where we have a strong presence. We're also very keen to support the pilot and scaling of new use cases. From our conversations with multiple partners, we've observed much interest in the delivery of dry spell forecasts as well as heat forecasts that are relevant for farmers. On the delivery channels, in 2025, we worked with what was readily available and feasible to implement with government partners through the existing SMS channels and existing IVRS channels. And this is, there's a case for taking on a further multimodal delivery approach, leveraging like WhatsApp or other chatbots. But subject to there being government appetite and infrastructure, we care much about making sure we have a sustainable pathway to scale. We are also keen to continue making the case for building weather information services that are increasingly farmer-centered by championing this iterative design process and delivery testing in different contexts and for different use cases. Another aspect of this whole AI revolution that particularly resonates with PxD's guiding principles is this potential for sustainability at scale. And I just talk about that for a minute. So these AI-based open source models, they're free for all. And as I mentioned a while earlier, they're significantly cheaper, faster, and easier to adapt, easier to use, easier to adapt for local contexts. Now, this doesn't mean that anyone can sit and build it. You still need like very skillful experts. But relative to the complexity of running and training and calibrating numerical weather prediction models, the AI-based open source models have become simple enough that experts in those respective fields can transfer production, generation, and benchmarking knowledge to government Met departments so that they can sustainably deliver these weather forecasting services in-house. A case in point was the recent, and I don't know if any of you all had a look at this, but there was a lot of posts around it. PxD attended it, a recent AI weather forecasting training that took place in UAE that was led by AIM for Scale, and as well as UChicago and the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, bringing together ag and Met departments from 5 countries to pilot such a capacity building exercise, identifying and producing ag-relevant weather forecast use cases using these open source models, and then benchmarking them using accessible user-friendly benchmarking tools. So sort of the foundation has been laid for building the blocks for this sort of sustainable transitioning. And at PxD, we're really excited about supporting this process and going beyond that, not just to support on forecast production and benchmarking, but also working with the ag departments to help identify relevant use cases, build capacity to effectively translate and disseminate these forecasts to farmers in a way that's effective for them. So yeah, with that, I'll stop. Thanks a lot.